YouTube Frogs, welcome to my complete guide for Yinlin, the highly anticipated and incredibly seductive Electro 5-star in Wuthering Waves. Yinlin operates from both the front lines and the back lines, dealing incredible amounts of electro damage during her ability windows. In this video, I'll be teaching you how she works, how to play her, best weapons and echoes to use, stats to aim for, what her sequence nodes do, and what her roles are for team building. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed the video. I make a bunch of content for Wuthering Waves, both educational and just for fun. Let's begin. So, you've probably seen Yinlin around town with her devilish smile and jiggling physics. If you haven't, then here's a little taste. So, whether you like it or not, if you plan on using Yinlin, that will be the animation every single time you activate her ult. Her ult, aka Residence Liberation, deals AoE electro damage in a small area in front of her and has her strongest multipliers for a single ability. The other basic parts of her kit are her E and basic attack string. These are both responsible for this forte bar you see at the bottom of the screen. Using her basic attack string normally gives her a little bit of her bar, with the biggest amount coming from her basic 3 and basic 4. Which unfortunately are also her longest animation attacks. If you activate her E first, then the first 4 basics she does will grant her enhanced bar generation. Her E itself has 2 presses. The first one deals damage and grants a big chunk of her forte bar, about 25%, and enhances her next 4 basic attacks. The second one deals more damage than the first, but grants less of her forte bar, only about 5%, and has longer animation time. For the most part, you'll almost always use both E's back to back, as there really isn't a downside to doing so, and it'll grant the most amount of forte bar energy for her ult, and you'll still retain the enhanced basic attacks. Swapping out in the middle of her 2 E's will put it on cooldown, making you lose out on the second one. So that's why, in my opinion, it's good practice to always double E. Alright, so those are the basics of her kit. Let's now talk about her debuff damage and her purple forte bar. So you'll notice while playing around with her that enemies you hit will have this purplish or even reddish orb on them, kind of like a debuff. This orb is what transforms into purple triangles that actually deal damage over time. When her forte bar is maxed out, holding her basic attack will cause her to send chains from the sky, turning all nearby orbs into purple triangles. This is her punishment mark, and it deals a coordinated attack of damage every single time the enemy is hit, every second. And the main reason it's so powerful is because all of the enemies that have this punishment mark are essentially linked. If one of them takes damage, all enemies under the mark will also take damage. It persists even when Yinlin is off field, and lasts for a juicy 18 seconds, meaning this is the perfect time for your other party members to unload their abilities. Yinlin herself also procs her own mark, so if you're operating a main DPS Yinlin, there's nothing to worry about. Now this is the main juice of her gameplay. So you're using abilities to get a full purple forte bar, you make sure the enemies have this small mark on them, you hold your basic attack when you're ready to send chains from the sky which turn all the small marks into big triangle marks. And of course, you unleash her ult when you want to see some nice physics. Okay, so very quickly, here's a TLDR list of her attacks for each specific situation. In order to increase her forte bar, which is that purple thing, you can use both E's, basic, heavy, or mid-air attack. With the heavy attack occurring without the full bar, this consumes stamina and then she spins, or her intro skill. Basically, everything in her kit except her ultimate. Now, in order to mark enemies with her debuff, you'll use basic, heavy, or mid-air attack, your ult, or your intro skill. Basically, everything except her E. So that's a complete rundown of what she does in simplified terms. She'll be dealing over 80% of her damage from both of her E usages, her punishment mark debuff, and her ult. And the rest 20% will come for her normal attacks, the echo skill that you choose to use, and her intro skill. For her forte leveling priority, first prioritize her forte circuit, which is the middle one. This improves her punishment mark damage. Second, her ult, which is the liberation. Third, her skill. This is for her 2 E's. Fourth, her basic, and then lastly, her intro skill. And then max out all of the extra nodes that you see for attack and crit rate. Middle nodes are especially important. The first one grants a free 15% crit rate for 5 seconds after her first E, and then the top one gives her second E 10% more damage, and then when she uses it, it'll give Yinlin 10% more attack for 4 seconds. Alright, onto her playstyle, and this section is very important. I've played around with her quite a bit and noticed a couple things. If you execute her full rotation with both of her E's and all 4 enhanced basic attacks, you might feel like it's a little slow, and that's because a lot of her abilities and basic attacks have quite a bit of animation time. If planning on using her as a sub DPS, which I personally am, some of her animations are a bit too long for my own comfort and leave me in a pretty vulnerable situation against enemies. Thankfully, in parallel with a lot of her long animations, those animations can be swap cancelled. So swap cancelling basically enables the animation to fully complete, but you don't actually stay on that specific character, you swap them out. So to skip my findings and just tell you how it is, I recommend adopting this quick swap Yinlin playstyle. So this involves very frequently switching her out and back in to skip her animations that would otherwise leave you vulnerable to constant attacks from enemies or bosses. Her most important abilities to cancel are her second E, basic 3 and basic 4, and her full bar heavy attack. In practice, this is how you'll chain abilities. So you'll swap in, you'll use both of her E's, but you'll swap cancel the second. For basic 2, basic 3, you'll swap in, use those 2 basic attacks, and then swap cancel the third basic attack. For her heavy attack to transform her marks, I personally like to synergize this with her ultimate because she can easily be interrupted mid-heavy attack and it'll ruin her whole rotation. If you cast ult and while the animation is happening, you hold the left click button, she'll cast the first part of the heavy attack while the iframe from the ult is still happening, and then when she sits, you can swap cancel that out and she'll complete the ability sending chains from the sky, but you'll already be on your next teammate. So that's a swap in, B2, B3, plus ult plus heavy attack, and then swap cancel. The basic 2, basic 3 plus ult is a really fast way to mark enemies, and the basic 3 can literally be cancelled by her ult as well, and then you heavy attack. If she's using Tempest Mephis, which we'll get to in the Echo section, this Echo is also swap cancelable. Beyond these, you can just play by ear. I'll stay on Yinlin longer if necessary if she's close to max forte bar, and I usually never use her ultimate without max forte bar because I really value the ult animation cancel. However, that is technically a loss of DPS, so as you get more comfortable with Yinlin, you can easily find spaces to heavy attack for her mark and use her ult whenever it's ready. If you have QTE up though, which means that swapping to Yinlin will activate her intro skill, you can do a full rotation without swapping off from her that isn't that bad. From 0 forte bar, which is completely empty, if you intro skill and then double E and then basic 1, 2, 3, you'll have a full bar. And if you have her ult ready, you can add this to intro skill plus double E plus basic 1, 2, 3, ult cancel, and then heavy attack cancel. In these rotations, you don't have to stay on Yinlin the whole time. You can still swap cancel after that second E or after that basic 3 if you want. If you want to synergize her ult on top of her punishment mark, you can instead switch the order by heavy attacking after basic 3 and then ulting. It's up to you, totally preference based. Now, if you don't have her intro skill up and you do her entire kit's rotation, unfortunately, it does not give her enough forte bar. You're left with about 20% to go. This would have been something simple like double E into basic 1, 2, 3, 4. So overall, these Yinlin rotation mechanics look complicated, but I promise you'll get used to them. And if you don't want to, that's totally fine too. That's why I recommend quick swap, because then you only need to adapt to 3 things: the second E cancel, basic 3 cancel, and ult plus heavy attack. I hope that your enjoyment with Yinlin increases with these swap cancels because they provide you with a sense of satisfaction that comes with Wuthering Waves combat. Weapons. So Yinlin is a rectifier user, and 1.0 Wuthering Waves only has a limited selection of DPS-oriented rectifiers. For her basic stat needs, she's prioritizing crit, attack, and a little bit of energy regen. But energy regen ideally will be supplied from her echo substats, so technically just crit and attack right now. If you can also get it, Resonance skill damage bonus is the best additional damage scaler for her, which we'll get to in the echo section. Let's first take a look at her signature, String Master. So at just level 70, it's already providing 30% crit rate, which is kind of insane. And this scales up to 36% at level 90, and just that crit rate alone is pretty illegal to have on a weapon. It also grants 12% damage bonus and between 12 to 48% attack. The 12% attack stacks twice for 24%, and if they are not on field, grants additional 12% attack per stack. So the last part of the tooltip has been tested, and the text here is not fully accurate. It actually gives the additional 12% attack for each stack, meaning the weapon's max buff is 48% attack at R1. So this weapon is pretty busted just for the crit rate alone, as it currently allows Yinlin to be incredibly offensive with decent crit ratio. The passive tooltip is also really good for her because she's always dealing resident skill damage, especially with her punishment mark. For other possible weapons, we can consider 5-star Cosmic Ripples, which is a standard 5-star. It's just a good stat stick with a little extra regen. We have 4-star Augment, which is the Battle Pass weapon, the only other weapon with a crit rate secondary stat, making it immediately valuable and useful. The passive also grants 50% attack post-ult, which is okay for Yinlin, but not the greatest. 4-star Jinzo Keeper, the only 4-star with attack percent secondary stat, making it a decent choice. And the other 4-stars don't really grant the best stats for her. Either HP percent secondary, which she doesn't need, or a little bit too much energy regen that it becomes a dead stat. So we're basically working with 2 4-stars and 2 5-stars that have relevant stats for her. If you've got none of those, you could consider the following 3 stars. Rectifier of Night for attack percent, and Guardian Rectifier for similar stats, but a slightly worse passive. So my overall recommendation basically boils down to this. String Master over Augment, which I would consider equal value to Cosmic Ripples just because it grants crit rate, and then Jinzo Keeper. Echoes. So just like with weapons, we are pretty limited on the options that any character can run. Yinlin herself is an Electro sub DPS, so she's immediately got 2 options that directly benefit either herself or her team. We've got 5-piece Void Thunder, and this is the dedicated Electro set, and it has perfect synergy on its 5-piece bonus. Electro damage plus 15% after using a heavy attack or resonant skill, and it stacks up to twice for 30% on a 15-second duration. For Yinlin, her E has 2 parts to it, and they both count towards the 5-piece proc. Her E cooldown is only 12 seconds, so this 5-piece set basically grants her 30% electro damage bonus at a 100% uptime. Combined with the 2-piece, the total set grants her 40% electro damage bonus on 100% uptime, which is absolutely huge. And even if you don't use both of her E's off cooldown, her punishment mark damage is also considered resonant skill damage, so its off-field damage that happens over 18 seconds also contribute. The other 5-piece option to consider is the energy regen set Moonlit Clouds. This set gives 10% energy regen on 2-piece, and 5-piece gives 22.5% attack after using outro skill to the next character. This set is much less powerful than 5-piece Electro, but it's a bit more universal as a supportive set and can be shared among all other sub DPSs. Originally, I was going to farm for this 5-piece set because I wanted to benefit my Jianshin as much as possible, but after testing her and realizing how much damage she actually did, I find the 5-piece Electro set Selfish bonus to be much more impactful overall. That being said, both 5-piece sets are very good in different situations. I do personally recommend 5-piece Electro for endgame Yinlin builds once we have enough resources to fully build everyone. Okay, so moving on to actual builds, and this is where we get into a 4-4-1-1 versus 4-3-3-1-1 discussion. If you don't know what that means, it's basically the cost of the echoes. Honestly, there really isn't much of a discussion. They both have benefits and trade-offs. So 4-4-1-1-1 is much easier to farm early game, and for the 5-piece Electro set and energy regen set, there are 2 possible forecasts, so that's why they can do 4-4. Other sets don't necessarily have 2 different forecasts, so they're forced to run 4-3-3. Now, this 4-4-1-1-1 build is much easier to farm, like we mentioned, because 4 costs are essentially infinitely farmable, and the 1 costs have the lowest RNG with only 3 main stats to aim for. This build ends up having high crit from those 2 4 costs, and high attack from those 3 1 costs, with basically very little elemental damage bonus because it lacks the 3 cost echoes. The 4-3-3 build is much harder to farm because you need to aim for 3 cost elemental damage pieces, but it is overall stronger than 4-4-1-1-1. This build has a better distribution of stats, balancing crit, attack, and elemental damage bonus, and naturally deals more damage with the same investment. If you get lucky though, with the 4 costs, running 4-4-1-1-1 becomes very efficient. Personally, this is what I run because I got super lucky farming the 4 cost rolls, and trying to build 3 costs currently from my existing build would be very inefficient and hurt my overall account progression. So if I do it, I'll switch to 3 costs when many more of my characters are built. Okay, so for the actual build, the active echo that I recommend to use is going to be Tempest Mephis over the Thundering version. This is because the Tempest is quick swappable, which means right after you activate it, you can immediately switch off, and it'll still complete its animation, plus grant Yinlin its echo bonuses. The Thundering Mephis, unfortunately, is not quick swappable, and all 6 attacks need to complete for the buff to grant. You'll notice in the tooltip it says final hit, which is the 6th strike. Now for main stats. If you do have her signature weapon or the battle pass augment, you'll have crit rate from its secondary stat, which means that for the 4 cost, you can basically always run crit damage. If you don't have a crit weapon, then you'll probably have to run crit rate for the 4 cost. So for a 4/4 build, signature weapon or battle pass, you'll be running 2 crit damage, 3 attack, in an ideal setting with perfect substats, or you can run 1 crit damage, 1 crit rate, which is a good alternative. If you don't have a crit weapon, then you basically trade one of the crit damage main stats for crit rate if you have good subs, or you might have to double up and do double crit rate. It's also an okay alternative. If you're running 4/3/3 with the signature weapon or the battle pass, you can run single crit damage, 2 electro main stat, and 2 attack percent. This is with perfect subs. If you don't have a crit weapon, you're probably gonna run crit rate 4 cost. Now, for both of these builds, you'll notice that you're running 2 electro damage bonus 3 costs. It is possible to run attack 3 cost over one of those electro. It's equally good. You really just choose the best substat. And this is because there are lots of sources of damage bonus for Yinlin specifically because of the 5-piece. At the end of the day, the difference is very marginal. As a soft reminder, so you guys don't get upset in the comments, both the 4/4 build and the 4/3/3 build are very useful and worth building. It just really depends on how you value your cost efficiency. Alright, so for substats, obviously prioritize crit rate and crit damage, attack percent, and energy regen if you get it. Energy regen, I would say, is more important than attack percent because you want as much energy regen from subsets as possible, and you can achieve up to 30 to 50% if your subsets are pretty good from all 5 pieces. And 30 to 50% energy regen is really all you need for Yinlin to have very good ult uptime. Now, for these additional damage bonuses, which include basic attack, heavy attack, skill damage, liberation, etc. For Yinlin, she prioritizes resonant skill damage the most because this benefits both of her E's and also all of her punishment marks. So resonant skill is the top priority. I have tested it. It's not heavy attack damage, it's resonant skill. After resonant skill, resonance liberation is also fine for her ult damage. Recommended stats. So at the time of recording, we're still far from endgame in Wuthering Waves, meaning characters are barely able to hit level 70, let alone level 90. For this reason, take this section with a grain of salt, and if you're watching this in the future where maybe she had a rerun, this info is possibly outdated. Currently, these are my stats as a level 70 Yinlin. For a 4/4 build, these are roughly the stats you can expect to achieve. Raw attack is 1700, which is about average depending on your stat rolls, 70 to 85% crit rate, with no higher than 85% due to her forte node granting 15%. Crit damage will be anywhere between 200 to 300%. It's all based on your substat rolls. And for energy regen, aim for about 120 to 140% and try to only get it from substats. I would not recommend a 3 cost main stat energy regen. If you're running 4/3/3 build, expect these crit stats to be significantly lower because that build doesn't have 2 main stat crit pieces. Still aim for 70% plus crit rate though, but the crit damage will very likely drop to about 180 to 225%. Now, obviously, since I'm running the 4/4 build, my electro damage bonus is very low. 22% comes from her weapon and 2-piece electro. If you're running 4/3/3, expect 70% from main stats and the 2-piece bonus, and then increase to 82% if you have her signature weapon. Resonance chain or sequence nodes. Alright, so I think both resonance chain and sequence nodes describes the constellation of a character. I'll go with sequences because it could be shorthanded to S1 to 6, and doing RC for resonance chain or R is kind of too similar to weapon refinements. Anyways, Yinlin sequences. Solid damage improvement overall, does not change her playstyle to become a true main DPS. Basically, she gets enhancement to all parts of her kit to become an even more deadly sub DPS. S1, both of her E activations gain 70% damage bonus, which is quite nice, pretty simple sequence. S2, electromagnetic blasts, which are her enhanced basic attacks after using her first E. This sequence improves them to recover more of her purple bar and give her more ult energy overall. You'll be using these basic attacks by default anyway, and I do believe this does allow the original double E basic 1 to 4 combo without the intro skill to fill her entire purple bar from nothing. At S0, you would normally need her intro skill on top of her enhanced basic attack combo, so this sequence slightly increases the uptime of her punishment mark. S3, her punishment mark damage multiplier, which is this judgment strike, increases by 55%. Probably one of her strongest because the base multiplier is roughly around the same amount, so this would be a double multiplier damage. S4, 20% free attack basically, and it comes from her punishment mark damage, which is the purple triangle stuff. S5, ult damage also receives a massive spike when hitting enemies with either the orbs or the full mark, basically double damage as well. And S6, after ulting, Yinlin gets 4 giga hits that are attached to her basic attacks that deal very high damage. This is pretty similar to Genshin's C6 designs, where a character like Yelan, Nahida, or Clorand gain big additional hits connected to some part of their attack. Yinlin gets 4 for hers, and they are connected to her basic attacks with a 420% attack multiplier. Alright, so overall, it's pretty interesting to see how Wuthering Waves scales their sequence nodes. They each provide a sizable improvement to her damage and overall contribute to basically double damage output for her entire kit. Team comps. So in Wuthering Waves, team synergies are a bit different because there's no reactions in this game. Instead, team building typically follows the archetype of 1 main DPS, 1 sub DPS, and 1 dedicated support. This allows usage of all major external buffs. The 1 sub DPS can run Moonlit Clouds, and the 1 dedicated support can run Rejuvenating Glow, which both of these sets provide pretty important buffs that stack on top of each other to the entire team. Yinlin fits into either the main DPS or sub DPS slot. I personally consider her more sub DPS, but her Echo choice prioritizes more offensive rather than supportive Moonlit Clouds. Regardless, she's definitely responsible for a large portion of damage coming from the team, whether it's on-field, off-field, or hybrid. When it comes to a team synergy, it really comes down to each character's outro skill. Yinlin's outro skill is a mixture of electro damage bonus and ult damage bonus for only the next character coming on field. This is a sub DPS by design. It matches very closely with the Moonlit Clouds 5-piece, granting attack to the next resonator after a successful outro skill. This outro skill is specifically best in slot for Calcaro mains, which currently operates as one of her strongest teams. I personally don't have Calcaro built, so I can't demonstrate proof of concept, but TLDR, he converts a lot of his important damage to ult damage, and he's electro typing, so he gets double buffed by Yinlin's outro skill. But, in my opinion, this doesn't need to be super rigid and defined. I think that Yinlin's damage output is so high that she can serve as a sub DPS or literally any team without needing her outro ability. The showcase that I've been demonstrating has been running a Genshin plus Yinlin together with Verena, and they are level 70 versus the level 90 Heron. The synergy isn't perfect because I'm running a main DPS Genshin, but with quick swap rotations, it's pretty evident that Yinlin's damage is packing a real big punch, and she's not even the one on field most of the time. So optimally, Yinlin is on a team whose main DPS deals either electro damage or ult damage or both. If that criteria isn't met, she can still be a huge damage contributor to any main DPS character you personally like to play. If you want to, you can even make her the main DPS herself, utilizing quick swaps to cancel her long animations, but you'll bring her back after the 1-second cooldown so she continues doing normal attacks. If you're planning on using the Yinlin Calcaro combo, just remember when you proc Yinlin's outro skill, which is by QTE, and you go into Calcaro, don't switch off of Calcaro because then the outro skill buff ends immediately after switching. This goes for any outro skill, but I wanted to mention it specifically for Yinlin because quick swap Yinlin is very popular, but if you swap that frequently, you lose outro skill buffs immediately. And that should wrap everything up. Overall, I think Yinlin's damage output is exceptionally powerful, so much so that 5-piece Electro set is worth more for her selfish damage than even buffing your main DPS. As a sub DPS, I think her value is beyond just an outro skill bot, which a lot of sub DPS naturally are, and she's able to smack enemies pretty well by herself. If I miss anything about her or new things are discovered, let me know in the comments and I'll compile them in the pinned comment. I'm testing the waters with this as my first Wuthering Waves guide, so I'm always open for feedback to improve. As always, thank you guys for watching, good luck pulling Yinlin, and we'll see you next time. Take care.